anchor of the show Indian Diplomacy on DD India. But did you also know that he's an author, a thinker, and a scholar of international relations? So let's welcome Sreeram Chaulia, who's right here with us with his book, Friends, India's Closest Strategic Partners. Welcome, Sreeram. How have you been?
Thank you, Munmun.
Finally, you could catch some breath, is it?
Yes, book authors also get time.
Absolutely. Well, yes. Now that we have
especially for national television.
Of course. Well, friends, that's not a word that is often used in diplomacy. We often hear of words like partners and allies. And then they say there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies in diplomacy, only permanent interests. So these are the 7 countries that you've identified as friends.
Yeah.
Tell us, how did you zero in on them? Why are these 7 friends of India and why not the others?
Yeah, we actually have 3 dozen strategic partnerships, Munmun. Close to 35, 36 of them officially signed and designated as strategic partners. Out of them, I've picked 7, which in my view are the most consequential. And the ones with whom India does maximum economic exchange for mutual benefit, the ones with whom we have a very high level of defense and military and national security integration, and the ones with whom we also coordinate for geopolitical influence, for India's influence to spread in different regions of the world, sub-regions of the world. So that's the whole purpose of this book, and I call them friends because, you know, it's not all about conflict and hatred and rivalry and war and violence. I mean, international affairs is also about cooperation and friendships, especially under Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We have seen the kind of personal chemistry he has built with world leaders of these countries in particular, you know. For example, the ruler of the UAE, United Arab Emirates, which is one of the countries listed here, he's the only person whom Prime Minister calls my brother. So it's even more than a friend. He's a brother. So there are many such, you know, very thick relationships we have built. And I thought it will also be catchy for general audiences to call them friends rather than partners. But yes, they are partners, but they are very strategic partners. If you want to stretch the friends analogy, they are best friends or maybe best friends forever for India.
Oh, best friends forever. Well, what struck me is what you'd written around the G20 summit. That's the introduction of the book. And, you know, you go back to those times of trepidation and uncertainty about whether India will be able to finally come up with a consensus-based New Delhi G20 declaration. And this is, of course, we are talking of September 2023. So, from your understanding, and you were also present there at Bharat Mandapam, the venue of the summit, through these 2 days of the summit. What really happened behind the scenes? How did India really pull it off? Was it friends that made it happen?
Absolutely. In fact, you know, there is a misnomer that for middle powers or rising powers, the most important thing to do is multilateral diplomacy, meaning large groups of countries. And of course, we do multilateral diplomacy. But the building block of multilateralism is thick bilateral relationships, pairs of what we call dyads, pairs of relationships. So in the G20 summit 2023, which we were hosting, very high stakes event, and you know, if it had failed, then the global order, global governance, all these were at high risk. You will remember that moment. And we managed to get the consensus because of especially these friends, the Western countries like United States, France, they were with us. Russia did not play spoil sport, it was also on our side. And you know, Japan was very much there, and you know, pushing us in the right direction and making sure that we got the consensus. So we coordinate with a lot of countries with whom we already have bilateral strategic partnerships. So G20 success is not just built on our ability to bring everybody around a table. Before everybody comes around a table, we do one-on-ones with all of these countries, you know. So Dr. S. Jaishankar, our foreign minister, launched this book, and he was saying that it's diplomacy 101, meaning the fundamental or the, you know, most rudimentary or basic diplomacy, which is the bilateral between 2 countries. And that is where, if we don't have these kind of strategic partnerships or understandings, we will not achieve the multilateral success.
I was somehow convinced that the declaration will happen because, you know, the stakes are so high that you can't not come up with one. But yes, India also played a key role when it came to the Bali Declaration. So, of course, like you said, all the bilateral strategic partners would have come together to ensure that this was a success. And of course, knowing Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership, it had to happen. But a very interesting take really on what really happened behind the scenes here in this book. Now, having said that, there is an old Spanish proverb that tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are.
Yeah,
So, while examining India's friendships, you mentioned that here. Tell us if these 7 are India's friends and you can name them, then who is India?
Yeah, we are a dependable friend, a reliable friend, and a country which is, I call it a rising power, which is above middle power, but below great power. I mean, we are not yet at the stage of the US or China in terms of overall power and influence, but we are getting there. And so, in that kind of intermediate stature between middle and rise and great power, India lies, and we are rapidly making upward strides. And these friendships, therefore, tell us that we are a rising power. In other words, our status in the international order depends on the kind of friendships we have and the kind of things we are doing with our friends. And all these friends help us to rise, and we in turn also enable their own to solve their strategic problems, their security dilemmas, their economic issues. We also give back. So what India is actually a very generous friend, but also one which has a clear goal to become that leading power in the world. A Prime Minister has given two clarion calls. One is the Viksit Bharat, or the developed country or a rich country by 2047. The converse of that in the geopolitics is the leading power, which is a country that has tremendous influence, not only in Asia or in our immediate neighborhood, but in different corners of the world. So these friends, they help us, especially in the Indo-Pacific region, which is our home, and where there is a long challenge from China for supremacy and for a balance of power. These friends help us. Most of these friends I've chosen are very critical for us to be able to counterbalance China, to beat back the threat of Islamist extremism from Pakistan. So, friends and enemies, they are like two sides of the same coin. And these friends really understand our point of view most of the time. We have disagreements with them. In fact, Dr. Jaishankar at my book launch was saying that convergence of interest does not mean congruence.
Yes.
So there are some areas where we also, occasionally have problems with these friends. But, best friends, good friends, we agree to disagree and still go on.
Absolutely. So much in the realm of friendship. Well, you've spoken about what Dr. Jaishankar said, but we know that building friendships or cultivating friendships requires burning a lot of midnight oil, really. So, if you examine India's friendships with all of these 7 partners or friends that you've mentioned here, what was that game-changing moment or tipping point in each one of them that really made that big difference and converted these strategic partners into real friends?
Yeah, I think, see, what has happened, like I said, the rise of China is one of the big, defining features of our time, last 15, 20 years. So, many of these countries, take the US for example, take Japan, take Australia, our 3 Quad partners, they're all here in the book. Even France, although it's not a part of Quad, it's from Europe, but they also have presence in this Indo-Pacific region. All of them began to feel highly insecure about the Chinese challenge and the shadow, because wherever they had influence, the Chinese were coming in with money or with their military and trying to muscle them out. So I think that is one big tipping point. A lot of them realized that they need to have allies / strategic partners / friends in order to be able to push back this threat of potential Chinese hegemony, and to establish deterrence, and to put some red lines for Chinese behavior beyond which it will not be accepted or tolerated. So I think this is one big factor that has propelled these friendships. India has had strategic partnerships for over 25 years now, since the late 1990s. But the nature of the friendships has changed. In those days, in the early days, it was about countering jihadist extremism and terrorism, or other non-traditional. But now increasingly it's about how do we collectively face the China challenge. So that, I think, is the ultimate driver of a lot of these friendships. Without a shared threat perception, there is no real tight friendship in international relations. It's not like interpersonal between human beings. You and I are friends. It's not because we have a shared enemy, because we have some psychological connection and we feel good about each other, right? But at the international realm, that's not enough.
Human relationships are not transactional, but that's not the case in diplomatic circles.
Exactly. And you should be able to join forces against what you see are your challenges or your threats, right? That's so it's more political at the international level than interpersonal. So I think the rise of China, in my view, is a singular factor that has cemented or even brought about a new avatar of these friendships. These friendships used to exist in the past, but now they have got a new purpose. And I think because China is so huge and so aggressive and so expansionist, that most of these friendships will survive the test of time, because this challenge will remain for all of us, for India and also for all these countries.
Taking off from where you left, you write in your book that no country that challenges or denies India's regional ascendance can be India's strategic partner. So, in that context, does that really explain why China is India's strategic opponent number one?
Absolutely, they are the ones who are, least favored. They're least favorable to our rise. They don't want a peer rival in Asia that can be their equal or even overtake them. Right now, India is growing at a faster economic, pace than China. The differential. So, if we continue doing this over 10-15 years, we'll catch up with them and we will even overtake them. So, they are anxious about it. They don't want to let go of their dominance as the number one power in Asia. So that's why we cannot be friends with them. I mean, it's a structural logic. We can try to coexist. We've done, for example, we've tried to settle the dispute that was simmering for 4 years at the line of actual control, and to get some de-escalation. But that doesn't mean the overall strategic rivalry is over. That's a long-term structural thing between countries which are ambitious and which are nationalistic, both of us, and which don't want to cede or to concede to the other. And in the Chinese case, they are even, they have this, chip on the shoulder that they are, the Middle Kingdom and they should dominate Asia, and that nobody should be come in their way to establish a Sino-centric order. So with China, interestingly for viewers, way back in 2005, when Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister of India, there was a strategic partnership signed between China and India. Today, I would argue that it has lapsed or it doesn't exist. It's not like we've gone out on camera and torn the piece of paper and say it no longer exists, but for all practical purposes, we cannot be a strategic partner with a country like China, because it does not wish us well in terms of our rise. They have a zero-sum mentality. If they are willing to accommodate our rise and allow us to rise without placing, obstacles and hindrances and, creating trouble for us, both at the border or in the oceans and through Pakistan and through their proxies, then we could talk about, friendship. But that's a long way away. I don't think the structural dynamics will allow that.
Now, broadening what you've said on China a little more, and it sounded more like an oxymoron to me when I was thinking that what role have really enemies played in the way India has crafted deep friendships and in determining the breadth as well as the depth of these friendships?
Yeah, so like I said,
China is not the only one.
China is not the only one. Now, if you look at, for example, Israel and the UAE, which are also the friends in the book, or even Russia, they are not necessarily trying to counterbalance China. If you look at the West Asian countries, the two friends, they are more concerned about their security and survival in their own region. But their problem is radical Islam and jihadist groups and terrorism and all these. On these counts, because we have a shared sense of victimhood with India, over time we have been able to build deeper connections at the level of the state establishment, at the level of the military, at the level of the intelligence agencies. There's a lot of cooperation we do, both with Israel and the UAE. And this is not beyond economics. What we are doing is, they have a perceived threat from jihadist groups, and so do we. And we often exchange information as to what these groups are doing. We share human intel, technological intelligence, and we try to deter them jointly. I mean, if you remember the Mumbai attacks, the terror attacks carried out by Pakistani jihadis, they deliberately targeted Jewish Israelis in Mumbai, and exactly. So after that, you will see that the level of cooperation in counter-terrorism, for example, with Israel, went to another level. Be it in Jammu and Kashmir or in a more general sense, there are a lot of these not only Pakistani groups but these transnational groups like Islamic State, ISIS, Al Qaeda, and their branches and different variants, right? So for all of these, Israel has been very, very closely linked to us in at the level of not just countering them but also trying to find how to stop their financing, how to engage with other like-minded countries to create small coalitions that can, you know, counter these threats and nip them in the bud. So there are a lot of such things, some of which is classified, but to the extent known, I have explained it in the book how these kinds of threats also matter. Of course, Chinese shadow is also coming in that region, in the West Asian region. So the US wants India and other countries to be more active in that region. There was a very high, highly anticipated corridor, IMEC, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, and that would include Israel, would include UAE, would include India, all these three, and underwritten by the US. And all of these were supposed to link South Asia with the West Asia and create some kind of like a continuous chain of trade and commerce and commercial, a kind of camaraderie or a group, which is based on mutual give and take. And that was supposed to help us to, also ward off the Chinese hegemony in that region, because the Chinese are coming in with a lot of money. So the US, its allies and partners, were supposed to do IMEC. That would be a kind of like an alternative. Unfortunately, the war involving Israel and its neighbors has, for the moment stalled the IMEC. But we are very hopeful, and there's a lot we are doing bilaterally with Arab countries like UAE. But I think we will do more once the war subsides. But the long-term threats are there, and these phenomena require coordination. We can't, in isolation solve or to completely eliminate these problems.
Absolutely, and there are many variables, like you said, and that's also something that was reflected in what Dr. Jaishankar, India's External Affairs Minister, said at the launch of this book. Well, going back in time, because I found in your book an interesting mention about India's cosmological texts and what they really say about India's future. Then there is a reference or a comparison of sorts that you've made between that and China's historical vision of itself and others. So, does conventional wisdom really play a role when it comes to determining these friends, that who would be India's friends, the choice of friends, and the kind of engagement that India would want to build with them?
I'll give you the example of France. Now, France in Europe is our #1 partner. It's the most important strategic partner. Like I said, we do a lot of things jointly with them at the level of the navies, the air forces, the militaries, and also intelligence. And they have a fear that their territories are being encroached on by the Chinese influence, and they want to beat it back by aligning with a country like India. Now, in the case of France and India, what is common is not just the mutual benefit or materialistic things. It's also the shared notion of what they call strategic autonomy. We also call strategic autonomy, but the meanings are slightly different. France is part of NATO, the alliance. France does accept the US leadership under NATO, but only to some extent. It does not want to be completely seen as a lackey of the US or a junior partner. So France is a middle power, and France has extensive, like I said, presence in the Indian Ocean region and in the Pacific. So there's so much that we identify with them. They help build our military capacities and vice versa. They help manage our assets in the far-flung reaches of the Indian Ocean and beyond. And we help a European country that is thousands of miles away to have a presence and a longer, power projection in this region, in Asia. So if you think about it, that commonality of vision based on strategic autonomy, that our history also, if you go back to our classics, the tradition has also always been, we counterbalance. I mean, if you look at Kautilya, he talks.
You mentioned Kautilya,
yeah, absolutely. And our ancient statecraft had it. He talks about different options when there is a very more powerful adversary in front of you. Okay, the #1 option is samshraya, which means you actually kowtow and we call it bandwagoning, meaning you submit to the big power instead of resisting the big power. The other option is dvaidi bhava, which is like a dual strategy, which is you align with a third country or a third state or a king or an empire in order to counterbalance this bigger adversary. And Chanakya always say, the Kautilya always says that it's better to counterbalance than to submit, because once you submit, your existence as a sovereign state itself may vanish. You'll just become a slave. So our tradition always is autonomy. And France, for example, shares that. France has a different, statecraft and its origins are different. But I'm saying that if you go back to our Sanskrit texts, we have always had this tradition of being independent, autonomous, not submitting to a more powerful adversary or even a powerful friend. Now, the US is a more powerful friend than India, right, in this list. among these 7 countries, the US is the most powerful. It doesn't mean that we are juniors to them. It doesn't mean that we have become their ally or we have become subservient to them, So there's always, we maintain that streak of independence, and that appeals to a lot of these countries. Maybe not so much to the US, because they would like us to, toe the line many times. But a lot of the
And
other,
we've seen that in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war as well, haven't we?
we have resisted those pressures.
Yes.
But a lot of the other countries, even Russia for that matter, why do they appreciate and stick to us? Because they think that India is a country that is not going to become a slave or an appendix of any bigger country. And that appeals to them. So I think that is in our genes, that is in our ancient works, and I've tried to bring that out in the book.
Chalo, let's look into the future now, and there's so much wondering, a lot of anticipation now that what will happen now that Trump is back in power, and there's so much that happened under him, and so a lot of surprise element is anticipated going forward. So what really changes for India, if at all anything does, in terms of its foreign policy towards countries that would be, one assumes, priorities under Trump 2.0, like India's relationship with Iran, with Israel, with Russia, and even with China?
Yeah, with Iran, Israel and Russia, of course, we have strategic partnerships. Israel and Russia I've covered extensively in the book as our closest. Iran also could have been, but because of the Western sanctions and the pressure on Iran over its nuclear program and because of its rivalry with Israel, we could not actually advance the friendship to a much higher level. So I think, but it's there. We have invested in the Chabahar port. We would like the connectivity to Central Asia to go via Iran. So I think we will sustain these relationships. We have done it whether it was Trump or Biden or again Trump 2.0. The thing is, they understand our dilemmas. It's not like why are we still buying weapons from Russia or oil from Russia? It's not because we want to challenge the US. It's because we have some compulsions.
National interest,
National
quote
interest,
unquote.
that's right. And our interests are not to challenge. In fact, Dr. Jaishankar put it very beautifully. He said, we are non-West, but we are not anti-West. So they have to understand we are non-West. We will not completely fall in line just because they don't like Russia.
He also said that there are shades of grey. It's not all black and
Correct.
white.
Exactly. We have that sense of nuance in international affairs much more. In our classic statecraft also, there are lots of middle categories or intermediate categories, not just black or white. So I think these countries will have to, in some ways, accept India as it is. And, in a way, we have become indispensable. I don't like to brag about India. We still have weaknesses. But what I'm saying here is our position as a rising power means that everybody, barring these two adversaries, our two neighbors,
China
everybody,
and Pakistan.
yeah,
Okay.
barring these two, everybody wants to be friends with us because they get benefits, and we have a huge market, and we have a positive image in the world, and we help to also burnish their image and give them market opportunities. Their militaries gain from doing exercises with our militaries. They, our diaspora is present in many of these countries. For example, the US, we have a huge diaspora. France. US, we have a big diaspora. Australia, we have a big diaspora, and the UAE, massive. These are like more than 4 million in the US, more than 3 million in the UAE, close to 1 million in Australia. So there are also these factors that make these countries want us because of our diaspora presence in these countries. They are highly productive. They generate wealth in those countries. They're ideal citizens. So they all want closer relations with India because that will also help to keep the Indian diaspora there happy.
So it's a spectrum of engagement owing to various reasons, various variables. Now, if we look into the future again, then we believe in multi-alignment. Our foreign policy mandarins have said so. So now that there are these 7 strategic partners, closest strategic partners or 7 friends, what happens now? Is the list going to increase? You think that the next book you write, he said could be a longer one, the External Affairs Minister. So I think he meant in the context of many more friends than 7 going forward.
No, I mean, even our statecraft says it. I quote Kamandaka from Niti Sara in the book, from medieval times, saying the monarch or the king or the sovereign who has the maximum number of allies is the one whose empire will be, most prosperous and will be the largest. Of course, we are not into empire today, but we want influence. I mean, that is how we become a great or a leading power in the world. For that, we will need to expand the circle of friends. We have these around 3 dozen strategic partnerships, out of whom I have highlighted 7, and we continue to sign. I mean, lately, for example, in Europe, there's been a big focus with Poland, with Greece. These are our most recent countries with whom we have signed strategic partnerships. We'll continue to sign them. Some of the existing ones we are upgrading. It becomes comprehensive strategic partnership, comprehensive global strategic partnership, like with the US. With Russia, we call it special and privileged strategic partnership. We add some prefixes to denote that these countries are higher than just strategic partners, or maybe best of best friends, or whatever you want to call it in the human analogy. So we will have to continue doing this because rising power cannot alienate many countries. I've argued that we cannot, for example, take the path of Israel in counterterrorism fully, because the Israeli method is like they don't need a lot of countries to back them. They just need the US support to survive. Their goal is not to become a great power or a big power. They cannot.
And there is conscription there as well, so all of the people are trained.
Yeah, it's a national security state. But India cannot be that, because we need friends and supporters from different corners. Tomorrow, for example, we need a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. That's been frozen, as we know, for a long time. But if there is a vote, we need 2/3 majority of the General Assembly, as well as consensus of all the permanent members of the Security Council for it to happen, right? So how do we get 130 or 140 countries to be on our side? So we need a lot of friends, actually. Sometimes people wonder, why is Prime Minister or President of India or Vice President or External Affairs Minister going to some small, remote country somewhere, That's because many of the times, it's not just because we are doing a lot of trade with them, or there's a huge defense relationship, or because it is helping to counter China or anything. Sometimes some of these smaller friendships are simply to make sure that we have our bases covered, we have maximized our friends, minimize the adversaries and maximize the friends. That is the old adage, of our statecraft, of our masters from ancient times. That is how you become powerful. So friendship is, I think, in many ways the path, the pathway to become powerful and influential in international relations passes not through use of force, not necessarily through, being very tough. Those are also required, but alongside it, you need to have a wide circle of sympathizers, empathizers, and people who believe and who stick by you.
Since we are talking about what India's future role could be in geopolitics, you say that India is a leading power. That's how the External Affairs Minister also puts it, and that India is an emerging world power. But where do you see India headed down the line by virtue of its friendships, its own capabilities, and the number of variables that you have spelled out?
We will be a leading power or a would-be great power. We will be a leading power or would-be great power because there is all the elements we have to be an equal of China and of the United States. We have the population, we have the size, we have the geopolitical location in the heart of the Indian Ocean region. We have all these friends who are willing to stand by us through thick or thin. And we also have a reputation for supporting and helping those who are in need, large number of developing countries as voice of the global south. So if you add up all those elements, it's destiny's call. It's a question of when. My view is, if we grow at 8 to 10% for 10 years, we'll be there. We'll be almost equal to China and maybe just short of the US, So, and I think we are entering into that kind of an era, what we call emerging multipolarity. It's not yet there. Right now, many people say it's bipolar. There's just China and the US. They're the two biggest. But I think we are catching up, and it's going to happen. And part of it will be due to military modernization and defense, and we adding hard power. Part of it is due to economic growth. But the third part of the story, without which is incomplete, is the diplomacy to maintain these friendships. Without these, there will be too many obstacles for our rise. We can't afford it. I'm waiting for 10 more years to see an India which is equal to China and the US, or almost an equal. And then, we'll be in a different league altogether, and we'll be able to do so much more in different corners of the world and really live up to our, stature or our oft-stated goal of being a Vishwa Guru or a Vishwa Mitra. All these will be fully, accomplished.
Such an interesting read, Sreeram. It was such a pleasure talking to you. And if you would like to read this book after this conversation, do pick it up from the bookstores or online, and we'll leave it at that. I think you've already started thinking about your next book. Yes. Knowing you, I know you would have already. Thank you, Sreeram.
The author's itch. Thank you so much, Mumi.
Pleasure.